The massive crystal dome of the Galactic Council chamber buzzed with nervous energy. Hundreds of representatives from different species shifted in their seats, their movements creating a wave of colors and shapes across the circular hall. At the center of attention stood Ambassador Gray, his tall, silvery form towering over the speaking podium as he called the emergency session to order. Members of the council, his voice resonated through the chamber. We gather today to address a matter of significant concern. He paused, his four eyes blinking in sequence, a sign of stress that everyone recognized. The human delegation has requested permission to demonstrate their latest military technology. A mix of laughter and dismissive sounds echoed through the chamber. Defense Minister Stone, a reptilian being known for his tactical expertise, raised his scaled hand. Ambassador, why does this warrant an emergency session? The humans have barely mastered basic space travel. Their technology is. He searched for a diplomatic word. Quaint. The humans had joined the galactic community just 5 years ago. They were the newest species to achieve faster-than-light travel, though their method was considered crude by council standards. Most species viewed them as amusing pets, clever for their development stage, but hardly worth serious attention. Ambassador Gray gestured to his assistant, who projected a hologram in the center of the chamber. It showed various human military exercises, focusing on their armor technology. Our intelligence suggests they have developed something unusual, something that defies our understanding of combat systems. Impossible, huffed a delegate from the outer rim. Their metal processing is primitive. They still use combustion weapons in some regions. Perhaps, Gray responded, his silver skin reflecting the hologram's light. But remember the incident at Mining Station 7. The chamber fell silent. 3 months ago, a human mining crew had survived an accident that should have killed them. Their emergency protocols, while seemingly backward, had worked better than anyone expected. I've studied their history, Minister Stone said, leaning forward. His scales shifted from green to a thoughtful blue. Humans have a peculiar way of turning disadvantages into advantages. They call it thinking outside the box, though I've never understood their obsession with boxes. The hologram shifted to show human historical footage. Look at their pattern, Gray continued. Every time we've dismissed their methods as primitive, they've surprised us. Their space engines shouldn't work as well as they do. Their communication systems shouldn't be as effective, yet here they are. A small commotion near the chamber's entrance drew everyone's attention. Captain James and Dr. Miller, the human representatives, had arrived. They stood quietly at the back, looking remarkably calm for beings about to present to the council. The demonstration is scheduled for tomorrow, Gray announced. They claim their new armor system will revolutionize combat protection. While this seems unlikely, I advise caution in our assessment. Minister Stone studied the humans thoughtfully. Look at them, he whispered to his aide. They're too confident. The last time I saw that look was before they showed us their simple water filtration system. That system was now standard on most colony ships. The session continued with various members arguing about whether to take the demonstration seriously. Some wanted to dismiss it entirely, others advocated for careful observation. Through it all, the humans stood silently, their expressions unreadable. As the session ended, Ambassador Gray approached the human delegates. I hope you understand the Council's skepticism, he said diplomatically. Your species has a habit of being unpredictable. Captain James smiled, that peculiar human expression that still unnerved many council members. We understand completely, Ambassador. We're just looking forward to tomorrow's demonstration. I think it will be educational. As the humans left the chamber, Minister Stone watched them with growing curiosity. In all his years of military service, he had learned to trust his instincts. Right now, those instincts were screaming that tomorrow would change everything they thought they knew about combat armor. He just couldn't figure out why. The testing arena gleamed under the morning light of 3 suns. Built like a massive amphitheater, its white walls rose high into the sky, designed to contain even the most dangerous weapons testing. Today, those walls would witness something unprecedented. They're bringing that into my testing facility. Chief Weapons Master Rod looked at the human armor with obvious disgust. His tentacles curled in displeasure as he watched the loading crew wheel in what appeared to be a bulky, almost primitive-looking suit of armor. The armor stood nearly 8 feet tall, its surface a dull gray. Thick plates covered every inch, making it look heavy and slow. To the advanced species gathered in the observation deck, it seemed almost laughable, like something from their own ancient histories. This is what caused all the fuss. Someone in the crowd chuckled. It looks like it belongs in a museum. Captain James stepped forward, his simple uniform a stark contrast to the elaborate robes of the council members. If everyone's ready, we can begin the demonstration. His voice carried no hint of concern about the mockery around him. Minister Stone studied the armor closely. Something about its design bothered him. The joints didn't quite match any standard configuration he knew, and the plating pattern seemed odd. "What kind of weapons will you be testing it against?" he asked. "Everything," Captain James replied with that unsettling human smile. "Plasma, laser, kinetic, sonic, whatever you want to throw at it." A murmur ran through the crowd. Such confidence bordered on madness. Even the most advanced armor could only effectively defend against 2 or 3 weapon types at most. "Very well," Ambassador Gray announced from his elevated position. "Chief Rod, begin with Standard Weapons Sequence Alpha." The testing began with simple laser fire. The armor, worn by a human operator they'd only introduced as the Tester, moved with surprising grace despite its bulk. But when the first laser hit, something unexpected happened. The armor's shoulder plate, struck directly by the beam, didn't deflect or absorb the hit. Instead, it fell off completely. Laughter erupted from the observation deck. "It falls apart on the first hit," someone shouted. Typical human quality. But Captain James and Dr. Miller remained calm. Even the tester seemed unconcerned about losing a piece of armor. The next series of shots came faster, plasma bolts designed to melt through battleship hulls. Where they hit, more pieces of armor fell away. The human inside kept moving, seemingly unconcerned about the growing collection of armor pieces scattered across the floor. "Enough of this joke," Chief Rod growled. "Full combat sequence." What happened next silenced every laugh in the room. The scattered pieces of armor suddenly came to life, each fallen plate lifted off the ground, hovering and moving with purpose. As more weapons fire poured in, more pieces broke away. But instead of leaving the operator vulnerable, they formed a dynamic defense network. Plates spun and whirled through the air, intercepting shots meant for the tester. They combined into impromptu shields, split apart to cover multiple angles, and moved in perfect coordination with the operator's movements. "Impossible," Minister Stone whispered, his scales now a pale white of shock. "The processing power needed to coordinate." Dr. Miller stepped forward. "Each piece contains its own mini-processor and power source. They work as a swarm, adapting to threats in real time. The more you damage the armor, the more defensive units you create." The demonstration continued, but now in complete silence. The council members watched as their most powerful weapons only made the armor system more effective. What they'd mistaken for primitive design was actually the most advanced protection system they'd ever seen. Captain James turned to Ambassador Gray, whose 4 eyes were wide with astonishment. "We believe this concludes the first phase of our demonstration. Unless, of course, you'd like to see what happens when the pieces go on the offensive." No one laughed this time. They'd just learned an important lesson about underestimating humanity's primitive technology. And they hadn't even seen the best part yet. The testing arena had transformed into a spectacular light show. Dozens of armor pieces danced through the air, creating patterns that seemed to defy physics. But what happened next would change the galaxy's understanding of combat forever. "Now," Captain James announced, his voice cutting through the stunned silence, "let me show you what we really designed this system to do." The tester made a simple hand gesture. Instantly, all the hovering armor pieces froze in midair. Then they began to change. Each plate shifted and transformed, edges becoming sharp, surfaces revealing hidden features that no one had noticed before. By the first star, Minister Stone breathed, his scales rippling with excitement. "They're not just armor pieces." Dr. Miller nodded, finally letting pride show in his expression. "Every component is a fully independent combat unit. The armor doesn't just defend, it turns damage into advantages." To demonstrate, the tester triggered another sequence. The pieces that had been acting as shields suddenly sprouted tiny propulsion units. Some formed what looked like small drones, others became spinning blades, and still others transformed into what appeared to be miniature weapon platforms. Ambassador Gray leaned forward, all four eyes focused intently. "You deliberately designed your armor to break apart." "Exactly," Dr. Miller explained. "On Earth, we have a creature called a lizard that can lose its tail to escape predators. We took that concept and asked, what if losing parts of our armor wasn't a failure, but a strategy?" The demonstration continued as the tester coordinated the swarm of transformed armor pieces. They moved in perfect harmony, creating defensive walls one moment and attacking formations the next. Each piece could function alone or combine with others to form larger, more complex units. Chief Rod, who had been silent since his initial skepticism, finally spoke. "The energy requirements must be enormous." "Actually," Captain James replied, "each piece contains a miniature power cell that recharges through movement and impact. The more action they see, the longer they can operate." A council member from the technology sector raised all three of their hands. "But the computational demands, coordinating all these pieces, we created a new type of swarm intelligence," Dr. Miller said. "Each piece has basic decision-making capabilities, but they also work together like a colony of ants. Simple rules, complex behavior." The tester demonstrated this by intentionally walking into a barrage of plasma fire. The armor broke apart even further, but each new piece immediately joined the swarm. Within seconds, the scattered pieces had formed a protective dome that not even the strongest weapons could penetrate. "This isn't just armor," Minister Stone realized, his voice filled with awe. "It's a whole new type of warfare." Captain James smiled. "We call it the Phoenix Protocol. Like the mythical bird that rises from its own ashes, our armor becomes stronger the more you try to destroy it." The implications hit the council members like a physical force. Traditional combat doctrine focused on protecting armor integrity at all costs. The humans had completely reversed this thinking, turning the very concept of armor failure into a tactical advantage. "And this," Dr. Miller added, "is just the prototype. We're already working on versions that can combine with other suits, creating larger combat units when needed." Ambassador Gray raised his hand for silence as excited discussions broke out across the observation deck. "I believe," he said carefully, "we owe humanity an apology for our earlier skepticism." The tester finally spoke, their voice carrying clearly through the arena. "The best innovations often come from those who don't know what's supposed to be impossible." As the council members watched the swarm of armor pieces return to their original configuration, forming once again into a complete suit, they realized they were witnessing more than just a new technology. They were seeing the future of combat, invented by a species they had dismissed as primitive. And this was only the beginning. The council's private research chamber hummed with energy as Dr. Miller stood before a diverse group of the galaxy's top scientists. Holographic displays showed detailed schematics of the armor system, spinning slowly in the air for all to see. "The key to understanding our approach," Dr. Miller began, pointing to a cross-section of an armor plate, "is to forget everything you know about traditional protection systems." The head scientist of the technological division, Professor Beam, raised a crystalline appendage. "But the basic laws of physics, you can't just ignore them." "We don't ignore them," Dr. Miller smiled. "We embrace them." Every piece of the armor contains three core components: a power cell, a simple AI processor, and a transformation mechanism. But the real magic is in how they work together. The hologram zoomed in to show the inner workings of a single armor segment. Inside, countless small mechanisms move like a perfectly coordinated dance. On Earth, we study creatures that adapted to survive. Lizards that shed their tails, starfish that regrow lost limbs, ants that build living bridges with their bodies. Nature taught us that losing a part doesn't have to mean becoming weaker. The display shifted to show the armor in action, now in slow motion. When a plasma bolt struck, the impact triggered a cascade of microscopic reactions. The plate didn't just fall off. It launched itself with purpose, its internal structure already beginning to reconfigure. Each piece contains what we call memory metals, Dr. Miller continued. Materials that can change shape when exposed to electrical currents. Combined with our miniaturized eye, they can transform into whatever form is needed most. Professor Beam moved closer to the display, his crystalline body reflecting the holographic light. But the coordination, the processing power needed, is minimal, Dr. Miller interrupted. We don't use central control. Each piece follows simple rules, like birds in a flock or fish in a school. They react to their neighbors and their environment. Complex behavior emerges from simple instructions. The demonstration showed how pieces could combine and separate, forming larger structures or breaking into smaller units as needed. The scientists watched in fascination as the armor adapted to different threats, learning and evolving its responses in real time. The power system is equally simple, Dr. Miller explained. Each piece captures energy from movement and impacts. The more active the battle, the more power they generate. They can also share power between units, ensuring no piece runs dry. One of the younger scientists, barely containing their excitement, asked, "But what happens if a piece is actually destroyed?" "That's the beauty of it." Dr. Miller grinned. The swarm automatically reorganizes to compensate for lost units. Like a living organism healing itself, the system becomes stronger where it's weakened. We don't fight damage, we adapt to it. The hologram showed a simulation of the armor taking massive damage, pieces scattering everywhere. But instead of failing, the system created new defensive formations, using fewer pieces to maintain the same level of protection. "We call this failing forward," Dr. Miller said. "Every failure teaches the system something new. The AI in each piece learns and shares its knowledge with the others. The more you attack it, the smarter it becomes." Professor Beam's crystalline form flickered with understanding. "You've created armor that thinks." "No," Dr. Miller corrected. "We've created armor that evolves. There's a difference. Thinking requires complex processing. Evolution just needs the right conditions and the ability to adapt." The chamber fell silent as the implications sank in. This wasn't just a new type of armor. It was a new approach to technology itself. The humans had taken their greatest weakness, their fragility, and turned it into their greatest strength. The best part, Dr. Miller added, is that this is just the beginning. We're already working on ways to apply these principles to other technologies. Imagine ships that become stronger when damaged or buildings that adapt to earthquakes. The scientists looked at each other, realizing that everything they thought they knew about human technology needed to be reevaluated. These primitives had just opened up entirely new fields of research, and they had done it by looking not to the stars, but to the simplest creatures on their own world. The council's main chamber had never been so loud. Representatives from 100 different species all tried to speak at once, their voices mixing into a chaotic storm of demands and arguments. Ambassador Gray stood at the center, his silver skin reflecting the chaos around him. "Order," he called out, his voice cutting through the noise. "We must maintain order." The military representative from the core worlds, General Blast, slammed his metallic fist on his podium. "The humans must share this technology immediately." "The balance of power. Share it," interrupted a delegate from the Outer Rim. It should be restricted. No species should have such an advantage. Captain James and Dr. Miller sat quietly in their designated area, watching the debate unfold. They hadn't spoken a word since the demonstration ended 2 hours ago. Their calm demeanor only seemed to agitate the other species more. Minister Stone, his scales now a thoughtful purple, raised his hand for attention. Perhaps we're asking the wrong questions. Instead of demanding the technology, we should ask why we never thought of it ourselves. A hollow laugh echoed from the Trade Federation's representative. Because it's insane. Who designs armor to fall apart? Species that had to adapt to survive. Minister Stone replied quietly. Species that learn to turn weaknesses into strengths. The chamber grew quieter as his words sank in. The human solution wasn't just about technology. It was about their entire approach to problems. Ambassador Gray turned to Captain James. Your species has been part of the galactic community for only 5 years. In that time, you've repeatedly surprised us with solutions we considered impossible. Why? Captain James stood slowly. On Earth, we have a saying, necessity is the mother of invention. We didn't have your advanced materials or energy systems. We had to think differently. But sharing such technology, General Blast began, would change everything. Dr. Miller finished for him. That's exactly the point. We're not here to hoard knowledge. We're here to contribute to the galactic community. The declaration sparked a new round of arguments. Some species saw the humans' willingness to share as naive, others as a clever political move. A few wondered if this was all part of some greater human strategy. The real question, Minister Stone said, his voice carrying across the chamber, is what else they might have developed that we haven't seen yet. The room fell silent. Everyone looked at the human delegates, who maintained their calm expressions. We propose, Captain James said into the silence, a joint development program, not just sharing our technology, but working together to explore new possibilities. After all, every species here has something unique to contribute. Ambassador Gray's 4 eyes blinked in sequence as he considered the proposal. A cooperative venture instead of a simple technology transfer. Exactly, Dr. Miller nodded. Imagine combining your energy manipulation techniques with our adaptive systems, or merging your AI algorithms with our swarm logic. The mood in the chamber began to shift. What had started as demands for technology was becoming a discussion about cooperation and innovation. And if we refuse? General Blast asked, though his tone had lost its earlier aggression. Captain James smiled that peculiar human smile. Then we continue developing on our own. But wouldn't it be better to work together? To combine our different ways of thinking? Minister Stone's scales shifted to a bright blue, the color of opportunity. I support the human proposal. We've seen today that different doesn't mean inferior. Perhaps it's time we learned from each other. One by one, other representatives began to signal their agreement. The fear and anger of earlier were being replaced by curiosity and interest. Ambassador Gray raised his hand for attention. It seems we have a consensus forming. But I must ask, why are you so willing to share your advantages? Because, Captain James replied, the greatest advantage isn't in keeping secrets. It's in finding new ways to work together. After all, isn't that what your council is supposed to be about? The chamber fell silent again, but this time with thoughtful consideration rather than shock or anger. The humans had done more than demonstrate new technology. They had challenged the very way the council thought about cooperation and progress. And somehow, that was even more revolutionary than their armor. The council's private archives were rarely used at night, but today was different. Minister Stone found Ambassador Gray there, surrounded by holographic displays showing Earth's history. Can't sleep either? Stone asked, his scales glowing softly in the dim light. Gray didn't look up from a display showing ancient human warfare. Look at this, he said, gesturing to the images. Their entire history is full of examples like our armor demonstration. The displays showed countless human innovations, simple wheels becoming complex vehicles, Basic flight evolving into space travel, and primitive computers growing into advanced networks. They don't think like us, Stone observed, watching a simulation of early human hunting techniques. When we hit a wall, we try to break through it. They look for ways around it, over it, or even use it to their advantage. Dr. Miller entered the archives, carrying what looked like an old Earth device. "I thought I might find you here," he said, "trying to understand us better." "Your armor technology wasn't a lucky accident, was it?" Gray asked. "It's part of a pattern. Everything we create comes from our weaknesses," Dr. Miller explained, setting down the device, a simple mechanical watch. "We're not as strong as some species, not as fast as others, can't naturally fly or breathe underwater. So we had to think differently." Stone picked up the watch, studying its simple gears. "But this level of innovation, it seems impossible for such a young species." "Young?" Dr. Miller laughed softly. "We spent thousands of years just figuring out how to make fire. Each step was a struggle. We learned from every failure, every setback." A holographic displays shifted to show more human history. Failed experiments, crashed test flights, collapsed buildings. But after each failure came new attempts, new approaches until success was achieved. "Look here," Dr. Miller pointed to a series of images showing human medical advances. "We couldn't regrow limbs like some species, so we built artificial ones. Couldn't see in the dark, so we created night vision. Couldn't survive in space, so we made ships that could carry our atmosphere with us." Ambassador Gray's 4 eyes widened with understanding. "Your entire civilization is built on overcoming limitations." "Exactly," Dr. Miller nodded. "The armor system isn't revolutionary to us. It's just another example of turning a problem into a solution. We can't make armor as strong as yours, so we made armor that gets stronger when it's broken." Minister Stone's scales shifted to a deep blue of revelation. "And now you're offering to teach us this way of thinking." "Better," Dr. Miller smiled. "We're offering to learn from you while you learn from us. Imagine combining your advanced materials with our adaptive approaches, or merging your energy technology with our swarm logic." The archives displays filled with new simulations, possibilities of what could be achieved through cooperation. Ships that could rebuild themselves during battle, cities that could adapt to any environment, medical systems that could evolve to fight new diseases. "But why share this knowledge?" Gray asked. "You could have kept it secret, used it to become the dominant species." Dr. Miller walked to a display showing Earth. "Because the biggest lesson our history taught us is that real progress comes from working together. Every major advancement we made happened when different cultures, different ways of thinking, came together." Stone looked at the mechanical watch again, understanding dawning in his eyes. "Your greatest innovation isn't your technology at all, is it? It's your ability to learn from everything, even your failures." "Especially our failures," Dr. Miller corrected. "We have another saying on Earth. Success is not final. Failure is not fatal. It is the courage to continue that counts." As the night cycle continued, the 3 figures remained in the archives, sharing stories and ideas. The armor demonstration had opened more than just a new chapter in military technology. It had opened minds to new ways of thinking about progress itself. And somewhere in the quiet halls of the Council, humanity's reputation was changing from primitive newcomers to innovative teachers. 1 month after the armor demonstration, the Galactic Council looked very different. The once rigid seating arrangement had been replaced by mixed groups, with species that had never worked together now sharing ideas and projects. In the center of this transformation, a new committee had formed, the Innovation Exchange Program. Its symbol combined the traditional council emblem with a human DNA helix, representing the fusion of different approaches to progress. "I still can't believe how much has changed," Minister Stone said to Ambassador Gray as they watched various species studying human history texts. "A month ago, we thought we were just evaluating the new weapon. Instead, we're evaluating everything we thought we knew," Gray replied, his silver skin gleaming under the chamber's lights. "Look there." He pointed to where an engineer from the core worlds was excitedly showing Captain James a new design. The engineer's traditional energy shield had been modified using human swarm principles, creating a defense system that could split into multiple smaller shields when needed. "They're like children discovering new toys," Stone observed, his scales shifting to a happy green. Dr. Miller approached them, carrying a stack of data tablets. "You should see the project proposals we've received. Everyone's starting to think differently." The main display showed various innovations already in development. A trade ship using adaptive armor principles to reconfigure its cargo holds. A communication network that became stronger when channels were disrupted. Medical nanobots that could combine or split apart based on the type of treatment needed. "The Council has approved all of them?" Gray asked, surprised at the speed of adoption. "With some modifications," Dr. Miller nodded. "But that's the point. Everyone's contributing their expertise. We provide the adaptive concepts. You provide the advanced materials and energy systems. Together, we create something better than either could alone." Across the chamber, the tester was demonstrating the armor system to a group of young scientists. But now, the demonstration included improvements suggested by other species. The transformation sequences were faster, the energy efficiency higher, and the coordination more precise. "You planned this, didn't you?" Stone asked suddenly. The dramatic demonstration, the willingness to share. "You knew it would lead to this." Dr. Miller smiled. "We hoped it would. Humanity's greatest strength isn't our technology or our adaptability. It's our ability to inspire others to see things differently." The chamber doors opened as another group arrived, representatives from species that had traditionally stayed neutral in council matters. They had come to join the Innovation Exchange Program, bringing their own unique perspectives and technologies. "The old barriers are falling," Gray observed, "not just technological ones, but cultural and political too." "That's how progress really works," Dr. Miller explained. "One change leads to another, then another. Like our armor breaking apart to become stronger, sometimes systems need to break down old patterns to create better ones." The main display shifted to show the next generation of projects. Planetary defense systems that adapted to any threat, terraforming technology that evolved with the environment, and exploration ships that could transform based on what they discovered. "And the military applications?" Stone asked, thinking of General Blast's earlier concerns. "Are just the beginning," Dr. Miller replied. "The real revolution isn't in making better weapons or defenses. It's in learning to see problems as opportunities." Ambassador Gray looked around the chamber one more time. Species that once competed now collaborated. Traditional enemies shared ideas. Ancient rivals worked together on joint projects. "Perhaps," he said thoughtfully, "this was the real demonstration all along. Not just showing us new technology, but showing us a new way forward." As the day's session began, the chamber filled with the excited buzz of discussion and debate. But unlike the fearful arguments of a month ago, these were conversations of hope and possibility. Humanity had arrived in the galactic community as the newest, most primitive species, but they had brought something more valuable than advanced technology. They had brought the courage to think differently, the wisdom to share freely, and the vision to see that true progress comes not from standing alone, but from working together. And in the end, that was the greatest innovation of all.